Okay. Even though the president is not a divine right absolute monarch, doesn't mean that he doesn't want to strongly influence policy. After all, every president wins elections by making promises, and they want to try to make sure that those promises are kept. So, the president is going to try to expand his influence and persuade people in the country to tell their congressional representatives to support presidential initiatives. He wants as much support as he can get in the media, unless the media is just ideologically not disposed to give a president a chance. Trump. In general terms, like any good leader, what you do is you use your personal charm and the powers of whatever office you're holding to expand and emphasize your power and project it beyond perhaps what the letter of the law says. So, one of the ways that in modern times presidents do this is through the lovely art of public relations. And what public relations is the techniques of playing word games in order to sell your ideas as reasonable and cast the ideas of your opponents as silly nonsense. Public relations is not so much saying what you mean, but saying what you think will persuade others, whatever it takes. So, in general terms, the public relations of the presidency is the responsibility of the White House press secretary. The press secretary is the president's spokesman and the president's liaison to the media, to the newspapers and television stations and other media outlets today, internet outlets. The press secretary has a weird job. They are absolutely loyal, they have to be absolutely loyal to the President of the United States. If they're not loyal, it won't work. Their job is not to express their own point of view. Their job is to speak for the President in absentia. In other words, for the President when the President has too many things to do to speak to reporters every day or frequently or all the time. Some presidents are very reticent with the press. Our current president is very engaged with the press. Was very engaged with him, positively and negatively. So the press secretary is usually the fulcrum between the president and the media. And in order to be an effective press secretary, they have to be willing to understand the perspective of reporters. A press secretary that has disdain or contempt for the media will fail. The media will see this as a sign of weakness and brittleness, and they'll try to play games. Beep, beep, beep. They'll try to poke. They'll try to make the press secretary, and by extension the president, look bad because the press believes that they deserve a connection to the presidency that has integrity. So a press secretary has to be willing to genuinely understand where reporters are coming from and what reporters' needs are, while at the same time massaging and managing the media. Because reporters don't always understand what they want or need in a given situation. Reporters, to be good, have to be strong personalities. You've got to be strong enough to get to the point where you're interviewing a president to ask hard questions of powerful people. You can't be shy. At the same time, you can't be completely woefully unfair or no one will talk to you. So what a reporter is supposed to do is be firm but fair, to look and probe for information and to try to get your interviewee, your principal, to reveal information to you before anyone else or instead of anyone else. So there's this sort of game, this sort of verbal battling back and forth between reporters and the president. And the White House press secretary is key to this. Because remember, when the president's not there, the press secretary speaks for the president. And if the reporters can get one over on the press secretary will say something in the president's name which might be newsworthy because it's embarrassing or silly or a misstatement. Or maybe they'll get a scoop and they'll get news that was intended to be released later in the day earlier because they're able to get something out of the press secretary. So there is this trial by combat, this game, feint and counter move, this give and take between the press secretary and the media and between the president and the media when they're there. And it's a question of, like in a good fencing match, it's not a question so much of strength, but of the ability to anticipate your opponent, manipulate your opponent, and maintain your balance while doing so, like any other martial art. So, the press secretary is key. But the president has something which no one else in the United States has. He has what Theodore Roosevelt called the bully pulpit of the presidency. Bully is an old-fashioned colloquial term. It's sort of a slang term from 120 years ago. And what bully means is both wonderful and brave and cool, all wrapped up into one. It's vivid. It's epic. It's a bully pulpit. And what the bully pulpit is, a pulpit is where a minister or a priest stands when they're giving a homily or a sermon, when they're talking about how the Bible connects to everyday life, interpreting the readings so that people understand what they mean and how they can be applied. So a pulpit is a speaking place. It's a wonderfully cool speaking place or speaking position because the President of the United States is the closest thing we have to a king. It is the closest thing we have to a pharaoh. And as such, people listen when the president talks. They may not like the president or they may love the president, but they listen. Because what the president says can influence what Congress does, what the courts do, what the military does, what the diplomats do, what the federal government of the United States do. In other words, in our name, the president is speaking. In our name, the president will act. So we'd better be clear on what the president is saying and doing in our name, whoever the president may be. The bully pulpit of the president is a reference to the fact that the president can say things and have them widely heard and widely considered as serious statements. No one else, if Nancy Pelosi wants to say things, a few people will listen. As Speaker of the House. If Mitch McConnell wants to say things as the leader of the Senate, a few people will listen. If the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff wants to say a few things, a few people will listen. But in general terms, if the President of the United States says something, it's like the difference between, okay, you're at the beach and at the ocean beach and somebody shouts tuna. Who cares? Somebody shouts barracuda. Maybe people listen. Somebody shouts shark. Oh, then you've got a panic on your hands. I'm quoting from the movie Jaws, but it's true. When the president speaks, people listen. That is the bully pulpit of the presidency, and it's something that every president tries to use. They try to speak past the media, through the camera, directly to the American people. You in there, American people? I hope so. So that's the bully pulpit. That's me almost tripping over my cords. Now, one of the ways that you try to get good information is by mastering the numbers game. And Winston Churchill once said that there are lies, damned lies, and then there are statistics, assuming that, you can lie to someone, you can lie to somebody with shameless outrageousness, or you can quote statistics, which is even worse than the shameless lying. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. The president has his own group of accountants, which is called the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, because Washington likes its alphabet soup and its acronyms. The OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, are the president's economists and accountants. When the president proposes a budget, The OMB has helped produce it. When the president proposes tax policy to Congress, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, has run the numbers and has a series of theories that they can use to explain why they think this will work. The OMB is how the president is supposed to handle the accounting side of his presidential responsibilities. In other words, the president is not supposed to break the budget. He's supposed to propose a budget that Congress approves, and then that is the basis of all federal spending. So in order to give the president skin in the game and the right information, you have the OMB. But the OMB can also be used to pass on information with the president's spin in a way that is harmonious with the president's ideas and the president's point of view. The usual opponent of the OMB is what's called the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. And these two bodies both have the same job. But OMB is supposed to work for the president, and CBO works for the Congress. So you can give each of those organizations the same raw data, and they're going to come up with wildly different interpretations of that data, and they're all going to have their I's dotted and their T's crossed because they're all a bunch of really good economists and accountants, but they're working for different bosses. The Congress wants the figures to say a certain thing. The president wants the figures to say another thing. And what are these figures? Well, they include unemployment figures. They include how many people are out of work. Now, back in the Obama administration, there was an interesting conundrum. In order to make unemployment numbers seem less, these numbers were treated as if only those who are actively searching for work are considered to be unemployed. But in 2008-9, the economy contracted, and a lot of people lost their jobs. And a number of those people got so frustrated in the first couple of years looking for work and not finding anything like their old jobs that they simply gave up. A lot of women went back to the home. Some men went on semi-retirement. It's just people left the workforce who would have preferred to work. Do you count them as unemployed, or do you count them as people who aren't even part of the workforce in any way, shape, or form? What Obama's OMB did, and what his Department of Labor did, and what the numbers said, is they did not take into account those people who had left work and were no longer looking because they were frustrated, but they really, really wanted a job. Instead, it basically disincluded them. There's a lovely word. It did not take them into account, and so the unemployment figures were lower. Another statistic that OMB and CBO fight over is census data. The U.S. Census, which is constitutionally mandated every 10 years, it's happening right now. I did my census about a week ago. The U.S. Census is designed to count the number of Americans. Why is this important? Because congressional representation is based on state population. If a state's population decreases, the number of representatives they have in Congress goes down. If their state population increases, the number of representatives in Congress goes up. Now, it's not just congressional representatives. It's also electoral votes. You have an electoral votes in each state proportional to the U.S. federal, the U.S. House of Representatives. So your population data determines congressional representation and your state's representation in the Electoral College. It also determines where welfare money goes and things like that. So the U.S. Census and what it means and how it plays out is played with by both CBO and OMB. Finally, you've got another bit of alphabet soup. GNP-GDP. GNP-GDP is actually GNP and GDP. GNP stands for Gross National Product, GDP, Gross Domestic Product. Basically, if you took all of the stuff that Americans produce and sold overseas and benefited from importation, how much money the U.S. makes every year is the GNP, the Gross National Product. How much money the U.S. produces just domestically without reference to foreign trade is GDP. The higher those numbers are, the better things are for America and for the president.